Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for the afternoon. I got some whispers. I got a little birdie in my ear that said, Torres, you may want to wait on that show on Wednesday because the first ever ACC-SEC challenge games are going to be announced. And so I decided to wait, and around 11 a.m. they were. And so a lot of you probably sitting there saying, Torres, ACC-SEC challenge, what? I've never even heard of that. What is that? Well, here's what you kind of need to know, okay? So bottom line is that obviously, 2024, we've talked about, is a changing landscape in college sports. Texas, Oklahoma going to the SEC, UCLA, USC going to the Big Ten. But beyond that, that's when all the TV contracts start to change. SEC goes to ESPN. Big Ten goes exclusively to Fox, CBS, and NBC. And so there's a lot of moving parts in 2024. I bring it up because on the college basketball calendar, we've talked a lot about how football will be impacted with the TV moves. But on the college basketball calendar, one of the big seminal events in college basketball is the ACC Big Ten Challenge, played every late November after Thanksgiving. And then, oh, by the way, on top of that, we have that great SEC Big 12 Challenge in late January, early February. And so I bring it up because over the last year or so, ESPN, which puts on both events, kind of came to a realization. They're like, wait a second now. So we don't have the Big Ten after this year. So the ACC Big Ten Challenge obviously will no longer exist because we don't have the rights to broadcast those games. Beyond that, the Big 12, Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. We don't, teams are coming, teams are going, who's going to be in, who isn't. And so what ESPN has decided to do is that ESPN essentially said, you know what? ACC is going to be stable. SEC is going to be stable. We have both those conferences under contract for the next decade. Instead of doing the ACC Big Ten, let's do the ACC-SEC. So this coming year will be the first year of the ACC-SEC Challenge, no Big Ten involved. And on Wednesday, we got our first announcement of games in the ACC-SEC Challenge. So there were a lot of good games. I want to react to some of them, but here are some of the marquee games that you need to know. Tennessee, Rick Barnes at North Carolina. Miami, coming off its first Final Four appearance in school history. They are playing at Kentucky. And then the one I think everybody is looking forward to. How about this? The Duke Blue Devils, some people's, including mine, preseason #1 team, is headed to Fayetteville to play the Arkansas Razorbacks. The Big Pick Invasion, baby. That is right. Are you ready for what should be one of the marquee games on the calendar? So what I want to do is break down all these games, and let's start with that big one. Because, listen, what I would say, anytime Duke is in anything, it's a big event. And this is no disrespect to a Carolina fan, a Kentucky fan, a Tennessee fan, a Arkansas fan, or whatever. But Duke does bring a level of cachet that I think most other schools in college basketball don't, right? It's like when Alabama comes to town. Even if you're not a huge college football fan, you pay attention when Nick Saban walks in, and it's kind of the same with Duke. So the fact that Duke is even playing a road game that early in the year is huge. They rarely do outside of what was previously the ACC Big Ten Challenge, but they're going into one of the most hostile environments in college basketball. And remember, these two programs have actually a very interesting history between the two of them. Most recently, they played in the 2022 Elite Eight. That was the Paolo Banchero, Mark Williams, Duke team that made the Final Four in Coach K's final year. They beat Arkansas to get to the Final Four. But also, as importantly, more importantly, for those historians of college basketball, 1994, national championship game, Charlotte, North Carolina. Arkansas beats Duke to claim their only national championship in school history. The president of the United States, Bill Clinton, I believe, was in the building that day. So I have a buddy who listens to this show. He says, man, I love that Arkansas matters again. I remember when Bill Clinton was at all those big games. Well, Bill Clinton might be making an appearance at Bud Walton Arena here in late November, because we have a fascinating matchup between two programs with history. Arkansas does not like Duke, and this is just going to be a classic, okay? This will be a classic with two teams that I believe will start the year in the top 10. I actually have both in my top 5 to start the season. And I'll just say, like just a really fun early season matchup. Duke returns 4 starters off a team that, remember, they won 9 of their final 10 games. Remember, Miami may have made the Final Four. Duke won the ACC tournament championship. Now they're bringing back 4 marquee players. Kyle Filipowski, leading scorer and rebounder. I believe he would have been a late first round, early second round pick had he decided to go to the draft. He returns to college. Jeremy Roach, 4th year in the program, decides to return. Multi-year starter, played on that 2022 team that made the Final Four. You have, oh, by the way, Tyrese Proctor, a projected lottery-ish type pick next year, returning for a sophomore season. Mark Mitchell, really good player. So you add in all those guys. Number 2 high school recruiting class in the country. Duke's going to be loaded, but you know who else is going to be loaded? The Arkansas Razorbacks. Arkansas, we've talked about them all offseason, cleaned up in the portal. L. Ellis from Louisville, Tremont Mark from Houston, Keon Menefield from Washington. Oh, by the way, they're already returning Trevin Brazil, Devo Davis, Jalen Graham, former All Pac-12 player at Arizona State. So just a fascinating matchup. And when I talk about a building that's going to, the roof is going to blow off, we've seen big games at Bud Walton. We saw when Auburn was number 1, fans rushing the court. We've seen other marquee matchups, but this might be the biggest one of all. For the old school Arkansas fans, number 1 UNLV came to town in 1991. I believe that was the year that UNLV was undefeated. They say that was the biggest game in Fayetteville history. You can Google stories about that game. The legends were that they finished church services early so that people could go home and watch that game. It was on a Sunday, I believe either Super Bowl Sunday or the Sunday between the AFC, NFC championship games and the Super Bowl. That was the biggest game in Razorbacks history at home. Guess what? Duke coming to town might just stop it. Let's keep it going. And let's get to the second game that I think is really intriguing, which is Miami coming off a Final Four, traveling to Rupp Arena. And let me just say this, and I had a bunch of comments, and some people agree and some people disagree, and some people are just arguing with me. The fact that Kentucky is not playing Duke or Carolina in this event the first year, I believe, is an abomination, okay? And so what everyone has told me is this, is Torres, well, you don't really understand what's going on. First of all, some people told me that Kentucky is playing North Carolina this year in the CBS Sports Classic. Unless I'm misreading the schedule, Kentucky's actually playing Ohio State. That's an event that's around December 16th. Then others are saying, well, Duke next year is playing Kentucky in the Champions Classic to open the season, and then North Carolina is scheduled to play Kentucky in that event that I just mentioned at the CBS Sports Classic. And so if Kentucky hosts North Carolina or Duke, then that means that then how can you do that? Because Kentucky already has Duke and Carolina on the schedule. Well, here's the bottom line. Here's all you need to know. Go back and look at the history of the ACC Big 10 Challenge and the ACC-SEC or the SEC Big 12 Challenge. You don't play the same 2 teams every year. All that's rotated is you get 1 home game a year and then you get 1 road game a year. Well, North Carolina has to go on the road this year. Duke has to go on the road this year. Kentucky is hosting a game. So it doesn't really feel like that tough of a decision to me. Send Carolina to Kentucky because I believe, listen, and I have people saying, well, it's because Kentucky doesn't look as good on paper this year, and it's because they're struggling in this program and that. Here's my mind. We can argue, but I'm just telling you, in early November, late November, when we're trying to make college basketball relevant, when we're trying to give people a reason to watch college basketball, I'm sorry, Carolina, Kentucky on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, it's going to move the needle a lot more than Miami and Kentucky. And that's no disrespect intended to Miami because Miami's really good. So let's get into it. And what I would just say, what I just said, Miami's a really good program. And so if Kentucky fans are disappointed that it's not Duke, that it's not Carolina, just understand that Miami team that's coming to town, they are in my preseason top 15 to start next year. Nigel Pack, still still at Miami after leading Miami, by the way, to a Final Four this year. Matt Cleveland, transfer from Florida State, really good player. Some other nice returnees. Wooga Poplar, if you remember him, he had a big NCAA tournament. Bensley Joe. Miami is a really good basketball team, and Kentucky fans, just be ready to go, because that's the kind of team that can beat you if you're not ready. Same time, I'll say this. Kentucky is going to have its hands full with its early portion of the schedule. They open against Kansas in the Champions Classic. Miami now at home. Gonzaga is slated to return to Lexington after the game that was played in Spokane this past year. So they got a loaded schedule. Oh, by the way, Ohio State, I believe, will be that Champions Class or CBS Sports Classic game. So this Kentucky team, the pieces are coming together. We're going to talk about Trey Mitchell committing in a minute. I'm telling you, fascinating, interesting, intriguing Kentucky team that, oh, by the way, if you're not ready to go, you're going to take some L's early, but hopefully with the additions of the veterans, of Trey Mitchell, of Antonio Reeves, I think this is actually going to be a really fun game. And I believe Kentucky is now in much better shape and much better equipped to handle a good Miami team now than they would have been a few weeks ago. The other marquee game, listen, and I think part of why some of these games don't feel as big, the ACC isn't living up to their end of the bargain. Syracuse is down. Georgia Tech, historically great, is irrelevant. Louisville, we'll get to in a minute, is obviously coming off a historically bad year. So outside of Duke and Carolina, there aren't a lot of teams that get you super excited. One team that obviously always gets you excited is North Carolina. I'm actually wearing the Carolina baby blue. No intention there. They host, Tennessee in that game. That's another big one. And I'll say this, first of all, Tennessee's going to be really good. Tennessee is really good. A lot of guys back from last year's team, Vescovi and Josiah Jordan-James came back. Zakai Ziegler, hopefully he's back from injury. Toby Awaka, by the way, playing in the U19 World Championships right now, is killing it. They're going to have a really good team. They also bring in Dalton Knecht, of course, the transfer from Northern Colorado. Chris Ledlam, the transfer from Harvard. This is also a sneaky important game for Carolina. Carolina, listen, I've said it a few times over the course of the spring and the summer. Hubert Davis, like if he has another really bad year, like if they miss the NCAA tournament this year, I'm not saying he's getting fired. I think it's probably in the realm of possibility, though. And so you start looking at Hubert Davis. They have struggled early in seasons. 2 years ago, they bounced back to make a Final Four. Last year, they took 2 losses at the event in the PK 85 event in Portland. They cannot start off slow this year. They need to be playing good basketball. That's a really tough matchup with a really good Tennessee team. That is one, I get why Duke, Arkansas is intriguing. I get why Miami and Kentucky is intriguing. North Carolina is going to kind of need this win. They're going to be playing a very, very, very good Tennessee team. And then obviously if Tennessee wins, you start stacking up wins for what could be a very impressive resume and what should be a very good SEC. Just a couple other notes on these matchups. First of all, game that I think doesn't feel sexy on paper, but will be Virginia against Texas A&M. Again, I'm not claiming that, we're going to be telling our grandkids about that one. But what I will say is Texas A&M has a chance to be very good. They return most everybody off of a team that made the finished second in the SEC last year. Virginia, of course, is Virginia. So that'll be an intriguing one. Ole Miss at NC State. Remember, Ole Miss, this will be probably the first marquee game of the Chris Beard era at Ole Miss. Clemson at Alabama. This is what I'm a little disappointed in. Is there not somebody more interesting we could have gotten for Alabama? I mean, Syracuse is more interesting. Virginia, you talk about a clash of styles. We couldn't have gotten Virginia and Alabama. We couldn't have gotten Florida. I don't know. You just look at the teams that could have possibly been. Clemson doesn't really move the needle for me. Kind of disappointed we didn't get something more intriguing there. Auburn hosting Virginia Tech should be an interesting matchup. I think Auburn has a chance to be pretty good. But those are really the matchups that you need to know. By the way, Syracuse playing LSU next year in that matchup. But I wish we could have gotten something a little bit more intriguing for Alabama. And then finally, let me say this. I think the thing worth noting, because there are only 14 SEC teams next year and 15 ACC teams, it means that one ACC team is getting left out. How about Louisville? You talk about a program that is going in the wrong direction. coming off a last place finish. Louisville couldn't even get a game in this event. Louisville will be sitting home.